The discovery. The road had grown long and empty, stretching across the autumn countryside like a ribbon of dust and solitude. Ethan Hale guided his weary horse along the trail, the wheels of his wagon groaning under the weight of goods unsold and tools unused. He had grown accustomed to this rhythm of life, days of silence broken only by barter, nights spent beside the creak of wood and the sigh of wind. 35 years old, yet already feeling older, Ethan carried with him the heaviness of a man who had lived too long without companionship. When twilight descended, he searched for a clearing near the riverbank. He preferred water nearby, both for his horse and for himself. The wagon rolled to a halt, and Ethan began his small evening routine, unhitching the horse, checking the axles, and laying out a bedroll on the hard earth. He thought of nothing unusual, another night alone under a pale sky. But as he climbed into the wagon for a blanket, something stirred within the shadows. A faint rustle, a muffled sound. His hand instinctively tightened on the lantern, lifting it high. The flame illuminated a sight that rooted him in shock. 4 children huddled together in the far corner of his wagon, eyes wide with fear, their small bodies pressed close as though to shield one another. Beside them, a woman lay half-curled, her face pale, her dress torn at the hem. A crimson stain marked her sleeve. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. Ethan froze. The children clung tighter to her, their gazes darting between him and the door as though calculating escape. Before he could speak, the oldest, a girl with tangled hair and trembling lips, leaned close to the woman's ear, then whispered, barely audible, "Don't hurt us." The words cut through Ethan like a blade. Not a plea for food, nor a question of who he was, but a desperate assumption that harm was the first thing to be expected. He set the lantern down slowly, palms open. "I won't," he said softly, careful to steady his voice. "You're safe, hey? I swear it." The children did not move. Their mother's eyes fluttered open, and Ethan saw their depths, startled, guarded, filled with pain. She attempted to rise, but the effort sent her into a wince that made the youngest child cling tighter to her skirts. "Don't move," Ethan urged. "You're injured." The woman exhaled sharply, as if the truth was something she resented being reminded of. Yet she yielded, settling back against the wooden slats. Ethan fetched a water skin and extended it, pausing at the edge of distance. She regarded him with suspicion but allowed the eldest child to take it. "My name is Ethan Hale," he continued, sensing the importance of names in moments like these. "I trade along these roads. Nothing more." At last the woman spoke, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Clara." She looked at her children, Anna, Caleb, Grace, and Samuel, though their names were not yet spoken, and then back at Ethan. "We needed somewhere, just for the night." Ethan wanted to press for more, but the shadows in her eyes cautioned him. He fetched bread and dried meat from his pack, setting it within reach. The children seized upon it with the hunger of those who had gone without too long. Clara touched the rim of the lantern glow, her hand trembling slightly, as though the simple sight of kindness was foreign. As they ate, Ethan studied her wound, an ugly gash along her arm, half bandaged with a strip of cloth. It was not the mark of a simple accident. He knew better than to ask, yet the thought gnawed at him. A family hiding in a stranger's wagon was not the act of misfortune but of desperation. "Why my wagon?" Ethan asked finally, his tone even. Clara's gaze dropped. "Because it was moving away." The answer held more weight than she offered aloud. Night deepened, and though uncertainty filled the air, Ethan could not tame them out. He gave up his bedroll to the children, choosing instead to sit by the fire's edge. The crackling flames offered warmth, yet his mind swirled colder questions. Who had driven this woman and her little ones to seek refuge in the back of a stranger's cat? What danger did she flee? And why did the fear in her eyes seem to carry the shadow of a man not present? Ethan lay awake long after the fire dwindled. The wagon no longer felt like his alone. Inside were lives woven with secrecy, and at the center, Clara, a woman marked by injury and silence. He could not name the feeling stirring within him, but it was more than pity. It was as though fate itself had placed them in his path, demanding he shoulder a burden he had not sought. When dawn began to stir, Ethan knew one thing with certainty. His solitary road had been altered. Whether he willed it or not, the presence of Clara and her children would bind his journey to theirs. And behind her guarded eyes, he sensed the shadow of a truth that might unravel them both. Bonds in the quiet. Morning broke with a hush of mist rising from the riverbank, softening the edges of the world. Ethan stirred from his place beside the ashes of the fire, his back stiff from sleeping upright. The wagon creaked behind him as the children began to wake, their small voices tentative, like sparrows testing the air after a storm. Anna, the eldest, emerged first. She looked older than her 12 years, her gaze watchful and protective of the younger ones who clung to her. Ethan offered her a nod, then busied himself with feeding the horse. He understood that trust would not be won with words alone, but with small, steady gestures that proved his intent. When he returned, Clara was awake. She sat upright, though every movement betrayed the pain in her wounded arm. Even so, she composed herself with a dignity that impressed Ethan. She would not let her children see her weakness. "You shouldn't strain it," he said quietly, crouching near her. Clara lifted her chin. "I've managed worse." Ethan studied the makeshift bandage. The cloth was already spotted dark. Worse doesn't mean it should go untended. He retrieved a small bundle of herbs from his kit, soaking them before pressing the poultice gently against her arm. Clara flinched, a sharp breath escaping. For an instant, her eyes locked with his, suspicion yielding to reluctant gratitude. "Why are you helping us?" she asked, her tone edged with challenge. Ethan hesitated, then answered with a shrug. "Because no one else is here to." The simplicity of the reply seemed to disarm her. She lowered her gaze, allowing the silence to stretch. Around them, the children busied themselves with crumbs of bread from the night before. Caleb, the boy of 9, gathered twigs to feed the rekindled fire, while Grace and Samuel played at building shapes from stones. Their laughter, thin but genuine, was the first music Ethan had heard in weeks. Later, as they shared a modest meal, Clara finally spoke of her husband. The words came slowly, as though dragged from a place she had long sealed away. "James, he was once kind," she began, her voice distant. "But kindness can be fleeting." He turned to absence. "Nights gone," whispers I was never meant to hear. There were other women, though he never admitted it. Her mouth tightened, and Ethan sensed the battle within her. Not to say too much, not to dishonor the man she still, in some way, belonged to. "You stayed for the children," Ethan said softly, filling the gaps she left unspoken. Clara's eyes glistened, though no tears fell. "What choice did I have? A woman with 4 children has little freedom. And yet, there comes a point when even fear cannot bind you any longer." Ethan understood more from her silence than from her words. James had not only been unfaithful, his neglect and cruelty had driven Clara to flee. Her wound, her exhaustion, the children's terror, it all whispered of nights far darker than she admitted. He looked at her then, not as a stranger stumbled upon by chance, but as a woman carrying burdens that had left her hollowed. Something stirred in him, a mixture of protectiveness and an ache he could not name. That evening, as the sky burned with streaks of amber, Ethan watched the children playing near the water. Clara sat apart, her gaze fixed on them yet distant, as though her mind wandered somewhere far beyond the riverbank. Ethan approached, settling beside her. "They are strong," he said, nodding toward the children. "They have had to be," Clara replied, her voice low. Children learn quickly when the world does not allow them to be young. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the laughter mingling with the rustle of reeds. Then Clara's voice dropped, nearly a whisper. "I don't know if I did the right thing, leaving. I don't even know where I'm leading them." "You brought them away from harm," Ethan said firmly. "Sometimes survival is reason enough." Her lips trembled, caught between agreement and despair. She turned her face slightly toward him, and Ethan saw in her eyes both gratitude and something unspoken, a yearning she dared not give voice to. As night settled, the children huddled together in the wagon. Ethan built a fire close by, and Clara lingered at its edge. The glow touched her face, softening the lines of worry. For the first time, Ethan glimpsed the woman beneath the weight. Someone who had once known tenderness, laughter, perhaps even love. They spoke little, but the silence carried its own gravity. Each wordless moment deepened the fragile bond forming between them. When Clara finally lay down beside her children, she murmured a quiet thank you that barely reached him. Yet it lingered in Ethan's mind long after sleep claimed him. By the time the fire burned low, he knew with unsettling certainty that his life was no longer his alone. Clara and her children had altered his path, and within that change, he felt the pull of something forbidden, something dangerous, and yet undeniably human. The forbidden flame. The third night came heavy with silence. The river's song was softer, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat by the fire, sharpening a blade he had no use for, his thoughts circling endlessly. Across from him, Clara tended to her children, smoothing Samuel's hair until the boy's eyes fluttered shut. One by one, their breathing steadied into the rhythm of sleep, leaving the two adults alone beneath the cover of night. Clara remained seated after the children had drifted off. The firelight painted her features in shifting gold, accentuating the tiredness that shadowed her face. Yet within her gaze there lingered something else, a quiet searching, as though she were caught between wanting to disappear and needing to be seen. "You don't rest enough," Ethan said gently, setting aside his blade. Clara let out a faint laugh, brittle at the edges. "Rest is a luxury I forgot long ago." Her words struck him deeper than he expected. For a moment he saw her not just as a mother struggling to keep her children safe, but as a woman who had once lived differently, perhaps loved, perhaps cherished, and who now carried scars both visible and unseen. "Clara," he began, his voice low, "you spoke of your husband before, of his absence. Was it only neglect?" Her eyes flickered, uncertain. The fire crackled between them, filling the pause. Finally she answered, her tone stripped of disguise. Neglect was only the beginning. There were other women, other lives he preferred to ours. When he came home, it was with anger more than affection. I told myself I could endure it for the children. But each year, I felt myself vanishing. The last word quivered, as though it had escaped without permission. She turned away, embarrassed by the confession. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted to reach for her, but restraint bound him. "You haven't vanished," he said quietly. You're stronger than most could ever be." Her lips parted, as though to answer, yet no words came. Instead, the silence thickened until it seemed to press around them. When her eyes met his again, it was not gratitude he saw but something far more dangerous, longing. The world narrowed. The fire dimmed, the night sounds hushed, and only the space between them mattered. Ethan's hand moved without thought, brushing lightly against hers. She did not pull away. Instead, her breath caught, trembling in the stillness. "It's wrong," Clara whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Then why does it feel so inevitable?" Ethan replied. The question lingered, unanswered. Slowly, as though afraid the moment might break, Clara leaned closer. Their foreheads nearly touched, their breath mingling. Then, at last, their lips met in a kiss that carried years of silence, loneliness, and unmet need. It was not hurried but searching, hesitant yet desperate all at once. When they parted, Clara pressed her hand to her mouth, tears brightening her eyes. "I shouldn't." Ethan cut her words short, his tone steady but gentle. "You've carried pain alone for too long. Let yourself feel what is real, just this once." She wept then, not loudly, but with the quiet release of someone who had hidden her tears for years. Ethan drew her close, holding her as though the embrace alone might mend the fractures inside her. For that night, the firelight concealed their choices, and the children's slumber shielded them from judgment. Hours passed in fragments of whispered words and touches that blurred the boundaries of right and wrong. Ethan did not promise her escape, nor did Clara promise him forever. What passed between them was something raw, two souls starved of tenderness finding solace in each other's arms. When at last Clara lay beside him, her head resting against his chest, she whispered, "I almost forgot what it felt like to be wanted." Ethan pressed a hand against her hair. heart heavy with both ache and wonder. You should never have been made to forget. The fire dwindled to embers, and the night folded around them like a secret. Yet even in the warmth of closeness, Ethan knew the dawn would bring consequence. Clara belonged to another life, one bound by vows, however broken. Their moment of solace could not remain untouched by reality. Still, as he drifted into uneasy sleep, he held her tightly, unwilling to surrender her to the world just yet. For in her arms, he felt for the first time in years not like a solitary wanderer, but like a man who had finally been seen. Choices and consequences. Dawn came pale and uncertain, its light seeping slowly through the veil of mist. Ethan awoke with Clara still beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. For a moment, the world felt suspended, as though the night's intimacy could be carried untouched into the morning. But when Clara stirred, the fragile illusion broke. She drew back slightly, her expression guarded, as though daylight itself had exposed them. The children, still drowsy, had not yet noticed the shift. Anna and Caleb busied themselves with the fire, while Grace and Samuel whispered playfully from beneath the wagon's blanket. Their innocence was both comforting and cruel, proof of what was at stake, proof of the life Clara could not abandon. Ethan offered her bread and water, but she took them without meeting his eyes. The silence stretched, heavier than words. At last she spoke, her voice low. "What happened last night, it cannot continue." Ethan's jaw tightened. He had expected it, yet hearing the words cut deeper than he wished to admit. "Do you regret it?" Clara hesitated. Her gaze softened, betraying her heart before her lips could frame the answer. "No, but regret and right are not the same." The truth hung between them, unyielding. Ethan looked away, scanning the horizon where the road disappeared into shadowed woods. He wanted to tell her she could stay, that he would bear the burden of her children and shield her from whatever past she fled. But such promises felt hollow, built on a single night of stolen solace. By midday, Clara grew restless. She paced the edge of the clearing, her arms still bandaged, her movements betraying both determination and fear. Ethan watched her, knowing the storm inside her mind without needing it voiced. At last, she turned to him. "James will come looking," she said. "Not for me, perhaps, but for them. He won't let the children go. He never cared enough for me, but they are his claim." The bitterness in her tone was sharp, but beneath it lay resignation. Ethan rose, meeting her eyes. "You don't owe him your life anymore." Her lips trembled. "But I owe these children stability, even if it means returning to a man who gives them only half of what they deserve. Can I risk their future for my own heart?" Ethan stepped closer. "And what of you, Clara? If you vanish entirely, what will they have then? A mother's love is more than a roof or a name." Her breath hitched, but she looked away, unable, or unwilling, to answer. The afternoon passed with uneasy quiet. The children played by the river, unaware of the currents of choice tugging at their mother. Ethan sat near the wagon, his thoughts wrestling with the reality he could not change. For all his yearning, he could not ask Clara to sever ties that bound her to her past. It was near-dusk when a distant sound broke the fragile peace, the clip of hooves along the far road. Clara froze, her hand instinctively reaching for Samuel, who clung to her skirt. The other children crowded close, their laughter fading to anxious whispers. Ethan's hand went to the hilt of his knife, though he knew steel would solve little. The sound did not draw nearer, but its echo was enough. Clara's choice had been made for her. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to Ethan. "I must go back. If I run forever, he will only follow, and the children will never know rest." Ethan's chest ached with the weight of her words. He wanted to fight, to beg her to choose differently. Yet he saw in her face the resolve of a mother, not a lover. She was not surrendering for Jamesy's sake, but for the small lives that looked to her for everything. He nodded slowly, though it felt like tearing something from his very core. "Then take them home. But remember this, Clara, what we shared was real. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten." Her tears slipped freely now. She stepped close, pressing her hand against his cheek in a gesture both tender and final. "Thank you, Ethan, for seeing me." They kissed once more, not with passion but with the aching sweetness of farewell. Then Clara gathered her children, lifting Samuel into her arms despite her wound, and began to lead them down the road that would return her to the life she had tried to escape. Ethan stood motionless, watching until they disappeared into the mist. The wagon behind him felt emptier than ever, stripped of laughter, stripped of warmth. Yet within the hollow ache, a strange clarity settled. For a fleeting moment, he had touched something true, something worth remembering, even if it could not be his to keep. As night returned, he rekindled the fire alone. The flames flickered against his weary face, and he whispered into the quiet, not expecting an answer. "Be safe, Clara." And though the river carried away his words, he knew they would remain, woven into the fabric of his journey, proof that even on the loneliest of roads, love, however forbidden, could find him.